Hi everybody, welcome to Farsight's June 2023 podcast. We are joined by our director, Courtney Brown, and I am Aziz Brown. And today we will be talking about the state of disclosure. That is going to be a really interesting topic, so you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, disclosure is really big. It's a huge thing right now. It's back in the news. We still have congressional stuff and military sort of releases that are hitting around the bush, but they're being agitated a little bit more. But there also have been some news conferences from various individuals and some interviews that are attracting quite a bit of attention. And we are doing interviews at Farsight. I'm doing a number of interviews on podcasts every week now. So there's been a ramp up and interest in the UFO phenomena and the disclosure process. I think it's good to actually put the whole thing into perspective from with regard to what we've been doing at Farsight. When we started Farsight a few decades ago, we started it with the idea of making a venue for remote viewing studies, for scientific experiments, for exploration, both political as well as extraterrestrial. And we were putting out a library of studies that we called mystery studies, mystery projects. But the whole idea of that sort of summary, we can tell people now that the goal was to have a complete library of the history of humanity that differs tremendously from what they're taught in school. So this is not scientists sort of deducing and avoiding the truth and doing crazy stuff. Like archaeology. Archaeologists stay away from a whole bunch of evidence that's basically banned, that they're not allowed to talk about, things that are dug up in the soil that they say, well, this doesn't make sense, so they just don't talk about it. So this is a situation where we basically rewrote the history of humanity. And on our main website, farsight.org, we have links to all of these projects. There's over 50 of these so-called mysteries projects or celestial projects, and they're organized now in terms of themes, so people can actually go into each one of our projects. And each one of our projects is 2 to 3 hours long, so they're like full movies where we investigate with really stunning movies that are really great to watch the history of humanity, from the ancient Roman gods, Zeus and Ra, and all that kind of, and to religious things like Noah's Ark, and then Muhammad, and then we go into a zillion other projects with regard to extraterrestrial type of stuff, include wars, extraterrestrial wars, and also the human condition with regard to the death traps and everything. So we have those 50 projects up, and they're nicely grouped in the navigation bar. And that is the remote viewing side of the history of humanity. However, it's always been our intention to do something at the end that allows us to put a cherry on top of the cake, which is to prove, absolutely prove. But remember, I'm a mathematician, so to prove makes a lot of sense for me, and it's also a really important word that I don't want to misuse. So to prove means something, that word prove. But to prove that extraterrestrials exist and that the UFOs exist, that they're real things. And that is now possible. So this disclosure process is really moving forward because of that. And what's made that possible, we had to wait until just this last year. In 2022, Panasonic came up with new cameras called the Panasonic Lumix GH6. And the Panasonic Lumix GH6 allows us to shoot videos at 120 frames a second, 4K, which is super, ultra high def, or total 4K, and then to do that in infrared. So we had to wait till those cameras became available. A camera sensor, for it to shoot 4K, that's a lot of information. And for it to write that information onto a memory card 120 times a second is really amazing. And it wasn't available till last year, 2022. So after that became available, we had to raise money and then get the cameras. Now we have Panasonic Lumix GH6s. We had GH5s before that, but they could only shoot 60 frames a second maximum. So the GH6s are a real big advance. And the reason we have to have GH6s is that the UFOs go so fast. They go typically over 20,000 miles an hour. They cover the entire sky in like way less than a quarter of a second. So you have to shoot 120 frames a second to be able to follow them. And so now we did it. We have that. And what we found out in this process is that at any 10-minute period during the middle of the day, you shoot 120 frames a second in infrared. They're using cloaking technology, so you can't see them in visible light. But in infrared, they're clear as day. And you can see in any 10-minute period, maybe 50 UFOs. So they're constantly over your head anywhere in the world all the time. And that makes disclosure possible. And in the past, it's always been there was a sighting of an unidentified flying object or an unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, and they're going to have a new military task force or they're going to have a new congressional committee to investigate it. That's all bull. The reality is, over your head at any time during the day, you can get 50 of them right over your head no matter where you are. And then we started publishing, and we started telling people how to do that. And on our website, farsight.org, very at the top of the menu, we have a printout of all the instructions for how to do it. And we have video instructions on farsightprime.com. So all of our major mysteries that go through all of Revision of Humanity, plus the instructional videos of how to do the things, are on farsightprime.com. And we had to have our own streaming service, because when disclosure actually hits big, we were really concerned that normal social media channels would potentially take us off. And so all you need is one person in the bureaucracy up above saying, hey, I don't know if I like this, and then off we go. You lose your channel. So with our streaming service at farsightprime.com, we have our own service, and it's totally equivalent to all the major streaming services: Hulu, Netflix, Paramount Plus, HBO. I mean, it's totally great. It's hosted by Vimeo. It's really solid, really high end. And so we have the remote viewing side, but now we have the taking pictures of UFO side. And what we're doing is we're not just showing people our pictures that we take, because you can always have a debunker come in and say, hey, that's just a smudge, that's swamp gas, that's a bug. But no matter what photo you have, they'll do that. However, the one thing they can't do is deny it when everybody can make their own photographs, their own video recordings. So we're teaching people how to prove that UFOs exist, not by showing them the perfect video, but by telling them how to record their own videos. And then that proves it for them, because then they don't have to worry about being told by someone else. They saw it themselves. They did it on their own stuff. They shot the footage. They edited on their own on their own computer, and it's there. So that is the cherry on top of the cake, and that's the thing and people are now taking our advice. They're buying the cameras, they're shooting the stuff, they're editing the stuff now, and they're sharing it on social media. So you're starting to see a lot of people talk about, hey, it's really easy to shoot these UFOs. So it really is a big moment in the disclosure field that we can actually do this with our own camera. So the process has started, and it's really impossible to start to stop it at this point. So yeah, disclosure is big. We can't predict how long it's going to take, but the process clearly has kicked into high gear. And once people realize that the UFOs exist, then they can go back to all of our remote viewing mysteries projects, all 50 plus of them, and see what's actually been happening to the planet Earth and humanity over these thousands of years.
Yeah, I mean, it's the state of disclosure is definitely along the lines of what we've talked about before as being in the hands of a grassroots movement where people are going to have to just go out there and experience truth, not just intellectually admit that it's there or have that as a tiny thought in the back of their mind where they think like, yeah, I believe it, but until that evidence comes to me, I'm not really going to make any effort to do anything about it. That's all going to have to change, because it's literally, the evidence is, well, it's not under your nose, it's right above your nose. It's literally right just up in the sky in every major city, and the evidence is all over there. But if you get the camera, then you can really see it for yourself, and then that just is a thread that you can pull on, and it'll undo the whole tapestry that's been blinding everybody. Just it's a big need to have disclosure happen, and if that disclosure element, the catalyst, is in the hands of everyone, then it's really hard for people to control a narrative around it and spin people away from the big cheese, so to speak, at the top, which is all the stuff that's in the mysteries projects that we've been putting out. I mean, these economic deals between human elites and extraterrestrials, and all the human rights abuses that have been going on. I guess you can call it just species rights abuses, alien rights abuses. I mean, it's like we've talked about before. Slavery is rife throughout the galaxy, and it is a problem. And here is no exception. So having people wake up to the one thing that's the boot on their neck is to realize that they're being lied to. They have to be able to get the truth themselves, and they have to be able to have that power in their own hands. So I totally agree. This revelation with the cameras that have now come into our awareness, and to be able to go out and take videos and pictures of UFOs, that's a big deal, and that is a driving force behind the current state of disclosure right now.
You raise an issue here about the slavery issue and so on. I think people have to realize, now that they can see that the number of UAPs or UFOs that are over their head at any moment during the day is so huge, it's not like they have to wait for a flyover over the White House. They're already over the White House in enormous numbers. And so now that people can see the UFOs, they really have to make the 2 + 2 conclusion, which is that the UFOs don't want us to see them. They're all using stealth technology. These UFOs cannot be seen in visible light. They are wanting to hide themselves from us. And when they fly so fast, 20,000 miles an hour, they make it virtually impossible for even air traffic control people to see them on the radar, because 20,000 miles an hour is like, that's really fast. And you only have to realize that when people are trying to hide something, they're up to no good. Now, one of the things that's really come across here is that the manipulation of the masses has been so thorough. First, in terms of hiding information, not disclosing things, making things secret. That's one thing. But also in areas that you might get a leak, where you might get people talking about it, such as the New Age community, they have been totally polluted with false information coming in through a lot of channels who are actually legitimately channeling ETs. They're legitimate. They're not. I'm not saying they're not doing what they're doing. They're wonderful people. They're really trying to help humanity, and they're actually channeling entities. But the entities that they're channeling are giving information like, it's humanity that's backwards, that we need to work out a few things, that it's all up to us. We have to do some certain steps to become galactic citizens, and that the ETs are friendly and waiting for us. That's just crap. That's just total bull. That's not what we see at all. When we get independent information, we see ETs out there that are rough. Then we see ETs that are hiding from us. We see ETs that are bending over backwards to keep everything secret from the public. And then we also see ETs manipulating human leadership, military as well as political, to get this type of secrecy to continue. So bad stuff is going on. And when people hold secrets, they hold secrets for a reason. They're trying to keep information from you because they know that you will not approve of that information. So that's really the state of where we are right now. Disclosure is big because it's got to go through a lot of elite people who have been fighting on the wrong side. We might call them human collaborators for the bad ETs. So what we have discovered in our projects is you have good ETs and bad ETs. And so disclosure is up against that. The bad ETs are authoritarian type of ETs. They have two groups that are allies of convenience right now. They're normally competitors. And those are the Orion, we call those human type people that come from the Orion system. And then reptilians, which are reptilians. They look like reptiles. And so what you have is very authoritarian groups. And then on the other side, you have free will ETs. And what we have discovered is that the authoritarian sides totally dominate what's happening on Earth. We have in our projects shown that they have written agreements that they made with human leadership. The human leadership was tricked into signing those agreements, but that gave them permission to operate underground bases, to do a lot of stuff that people would not want to have happen if they knew about it. And then they have done a situation where, because human leadership signed those agreements, the free will ETs have to recognize free will and said, well, they signed it, so what can we do? But the agreements are getting old, and they need new agreements to be signed. So right now we're in a situation where we're under the threat of the human leadership signing new agreements, and the authoritarian leadership, the authoritarian ETs, they really have the human leadership in their pocket, so to speak. The free will ETs, on the other hand, have been trying to get the attention of the masses. A lot of it has been behind the scenes with regard to the media, movies especially. They have been seeding information into scriptwriters so that when scriptwriters wake up, they say, hey, I've got a new idea for a great new show. And you get a new Star Trek show coming out, you get Star Wars, you get The Matrix, you get a lot of movies coming out that reveal elements of things that are happening in the real ET world. And then the public gets used to those ideas, so things are not so shocking anymore. So in a real sense, the free will ETs have won the hearts and minds of the masses, whereas the authoritarian ETs have the leadership in their pocket. Not all of the leadership. I'd say my guess is around half of the military in the United States supports the free will ETs. But there's a stalemate, and the military can't do this by themselves. They're stuck. They're polarized. Half of them want to continue the relationships with the authoritarian ETs, who are helping them to some extent with technological stuff. And then the other half realize that's a ruse, and you want to break away and align themselves with the free will ETs. But all that complexity has to come out with the disclosure process. And that's why it's been held back so much, because you're talking about a lot of human collaborators having to face the music. And you're talking about a lot of pressure from the authoritarian ETs on those people to hold the line. And so, it's the disclosure process is really a really difficult thing.
Yeah, the soft disclosure is definitely a big part of this disclosure process. As you've said, is just the seeding of all this true information through our media, through television shows, video games, all this type of stuff. Actually, we've talked about this before. The idea of the future. I mean, I've always wanted to have, well, us being Americans in the United States at the moment, I've always wanted to have life in America be like how the Jetsons is, which should, according to the Jetsons' actual timeline, be now, since we're in the year 2000 and past. So that's not the case, but I would love that. That would be a fantastic world for America to be living in at the moment. And it's not like that's impossible. It's actually, given the technology that we've seen in our sessions, that's here, just it's behind closed doors, all that technology to make that life possible, to make that jump in a society real. But we're not living in that society. Our society is a bit more like another TV show called Rick and Morty, where if you want that technology, if you want to have the psychic abilities, if you want to have just things that are beyond the status quo, it's you. You got to get it. You got to sit down and do the meditation, do the work. You've got to get the science. And no, there's no college major that's going to get you a disclosure-esque lifestyle. That's just not going to happen. So if you want to live in a post-disclosure world right now, like tomorrow, you've got to go out there and start walking the walk. And it's basically, we've talked about before, getting the camera and looking at the UFOs. That's a great place to start, to actually see them flying above your head. That is a number one perfect place to start if you want to get on that journey. Another thing would just be the stuff that we've basically been parroting for years now, is learning remote viewing and learning how to at least meditate and just calm the mind, because we've had it happen multiple times before when I've asked ETs these questions on how to get better at the psychic abilities. And I've asked reptilians that question many times in our sessions over the years. And with the reptilians in particular, I really like their answers the best, because they laugh at me. They laugh in my face at this idea that, one of them is my favorite. His response was that you're too agitated. Literally, the guy's telling me, like, you should meditate more, but you're too agitated. But he's saying it with, like, this snidey-esque comment alongside with it. And he's saying that you're too agitated because we made you that way. So all of you people saying to yourself, and I'm included in this you people bunch, I'm included in this. He's saying this to me and everyone else, humanity as a whole. When you sit down and meditate and you think to yourself, I'm too distracted, or I can't really sit still for 5 minutes, that's by design. You're not naturally like that. That's not just you. That's something that all of us have to put a lot of elbow grease into to push past if you want to have any of those more deep natural psychic abilities without drugs. And that's a huge part of it, because being able to do it soberly, being able to do it consistently, being able to just live in that state is a huge part of us being in a free society where we can actually have control of our development and not be super dependent on any external stimulus. I mean, being the idea of dependency in and of itself is a concept that we are very, very opposed to in this whole disclosure thing. We want to be an independent human civilization with a very high level of technology and a high level of spiritual advancement so that we can really thrive as a people. And that is something that the controlling ETs, that is something that the controlling humans on this planet, who have a lot of those world leaders in their pockets, just as you said, those guys are definitely against that type of concept, that type of reality. So if you want it, you gotta fight for it, and you gotta fight for it now. So
yeah. The disclosure process is really going to affect so many things because of what you just said. It's not just disclosing that the ETs are real, but disclosing how much control there has been over humanity, over populations by their governments for so long. And this control is not just control over people because of what they get exposed to in the media, but also controls in any way, shape, or form through, like, drugs. So, a lot of people complain about violence in Mexico. Even the State Department is telling Americans not to go to Mexico anymore. It's too violent. But the reason Mexico is so violent with all the drug cartels is because of the drug problem here in the United States. And that is a huge level of money that is involved in all of that. And the cartels are much more wealthy and militarily capable than the Mexican government. So, the reason the Mexicans have the problem is because of us, the drug problem on our side, through illegal drugs of all types. And, that type of control by drugging people, the population is so used to being high that they don't fight for their freedom when they're high. The people don't have to fight for something if they don't feel bad about it because they're high. And if you take the drugs away, then you're sort of faced with reality and you realize something's got to be done. So drugging people is one. Look at a mental hospital. Mental hospitals are filled with people who are drugged, and that's because people would be uncontrollable and difficult if they were not drugged. Okay, well, look at it in terms of the larger population. The larger population is drugged in large part because, well, they would be volatile if they weren't drugged. There's another thing about the disclosure process that we have to understand. The disclosure process has to happen quickly. Now, I don't mean like quickly, like relative to now, although I think it's happening very soon. But in the ancient of days, the ETs did try numerous other times to change humanity in a slow way by introducing all major religions on the planet. All came about through ETs introducing ideas and hoping that those ideas percolated through the societies over some hundreds of years, and then change the societies for the better and get them more compatible with the free will ET ideas. But every single time that was done, the oppressive authoritarian ETs were able to pervert those ideas. So even with, you could talk about Vedic science, pre-Hindu stuff, you could talk about Buddhism, but let's talk about Christianity for a second. You get the basic idea of Christianity. Love is the element that drives the universe, and it's good to forgive people and things like that. And that got changed into a very authoritarian mindset where if you sin, you will go to hell. You will burn in hell for all eternity. And in order to have eternal life, you must get on your knees and beg for forgiveness. Otherwise, you will be damned in hell and you will not have eternal life. Well, what we have discovered at Farsight is that we, humans, everybody, ET and human alike, are what we call ISBEs. ISBE is someone who is for the purpose of being, no other thing. And we don't use the word soul or spirit anymore because the ISBEs are who we are. And these bodies are just biological machines that drop off and leave it, and then our ISBE self remains. But the ISBEs, they are in a situation where they can be tricked. They cannot be killed no matter what. No one in the whole galaxy and the whole universe can kill an ISBE. But you can trap it, you can confuse it, you can do things with it, but you can't kill it. So what they have done is they have, in the Catholic Church, for example, they have replaced all the Greek and Roman gods. So we had all the Greek and Roman gods, and then you had that converted into various saints, and you get a continuation to the same authoritarian mindset where people have to act in a certain way and be very rigid and fearful of sin, and and so this authoritarian mindset sort of gets deeply embedded, producing a mentality of having to obey. And so the whole idea of having disclosure slowly doesn't work. It's been tried a number of times and it simply didn't work. So this time the ETs have been setting things up so that disclosure happens fast. And if it happens fast, then the authoritarian ETs may not be able to control it. This is like, for example, when the collapse of the former Soviet Union happened. The U.S. State Department had no idea it was going to happen until like 7-10 days before it happened. And it caught them both. They caught them all by surprise. So when an authoritarian regime starts to weaken and the masses start to rise up and throw it off, it's very unpredictable, and authoritarian regimes just can't really control it anymore. And so that's what the ETs, the free will ETs, are trying to do, to have an uprising from below so that the authoritarian elements in the society, both ET and human, just can't control it anymore. And then the disclosure process results in something that happens quickly. So that's the difference between what they're doing now and what they did in the past. Although I must add that our evidence that we have suggests that no one knows how it's going to turn out. It's an experiment, and how it turns out will result in what the free will ETs do now. We do know that the free will ETs are dominant militarily in the solar system, but that the authoritarian ETs are dominant in the Earth, on Earth. So when we're taking video recordings of these UFOs, nearly all the time we're getting recordings of the authoritarian ETs. So, that they're really dominant on the planet Earth. And the free will ETs, they want to help us, but there's limited of what they can actually do, and so the disclosure process is needed. Look at it this way: they can't just invade and kick out the authoritarian ETs. If they invaded, then the entire human population on the earth would look up and say, "Oh my gosh, we're being invaded," and then they'd scream for the human government to protect them. And then the authoritarian ETs would help out and things like that. So the free will ETs would end up fighting the humans as well as the authoritarian ETs. It just wouldn't work. And then let's say they conquered the authoritarian ETs. Then they'd have to re-educate the entire populace. It's like sending them off to education camps. It just wouldn't work. So the free will ETs really have no way to do this unless the masses rise up and ask for the free will ETs to intervene. There has to be this disclosure process. So that's going to be very interesting to see how this happens. No one really has got much history with this type of process, sort of rapid disclosure leading to a revolution from below. It'll be interesting to see. Nobody really knows how it'll turn out, but that's what's at stake right now.
Yeah, honestly, when I sort of think of what does it mean to rise up? Does it mean us having a picket sign and going over to Congress and saying, "Tell us about the secret space programs," or is there another aspect to rising up for the grassroots form of disclosure? I sometimes think to myself, most logically, that, well, I sometimes, maybe it's not most logically, but it's just the way that it sort of fleshes out in my mind, is the idea of when you get your camera, when you go outside, when you convince yourself, because no one can really convince you. People can tell you and you can say, like, okay, I can see that that's true, but you really know it through experience. And if you can experience it and then you know it, that this is, there are ETs all over the place, you're taking videos of them. They're flying all over the place, and as you said before, they don't want you, the common folk, to know about them. But they have a lot of business and a lot of interest in this place. Then you know that something fishy is going on, and you didn't draw the long end of the stick in this situation. Yeah. So, if you've gotten to that point, what does it really mean to rebel? And when I start thinking about it, sometimes I think that it's basically like just going about your life, creating a different life, a life that is based on what you really want to do. It's just your own passions really guiding you in this one. But what you really want to do, given that the world is not what you were told, but what you've discovered. And I wonder what that's going to be for everybody, because I think it would be unique for everybody. And some of those examples of rather extraordinary people that we've seen on YouTube, but we have talked about just personally, just between us, as people like in that video that we were talking about with the guy who had these magnets, and he was able to build a drone that ran on magnets, and there was no propellers with it. It just magnets on southern polarization, and then a sheet of aluminum, and then magnets at the top, and they were spinning in opposite directions, and it makes a sail that, like the torus form of a magnetic field. If you charge it up with electricity, the field gets stronger, and it's like a magnet sail, and it caused lift.
Yeah,
that's a person.
We're starting to understand the technology behind the propulsion systems that the ETs use.
It's different, and that example right there of that person who went out and built himself a drone that didn't run with propellers, and it didn't run with any of the conventional modes of transportation, that is an example of somebody who knows that the status quo is crazy, and he's decided to just do it on his own. That's the Rick and Morty type of present that we're living in, where some guy just decided to take his world into his own hands and say, I want that, and made it happen. And that's something that's happening for every single person who's taking a camera out, getting it to shoot full spectrum infrared and pointing it at the sky. That is something that I think is just the first domino of many. And like everybody else, I don't know how it's going to shake out. I wonder what a real rebellion is going to look like, but I think it's going to be a real diverse concept of what it means to rebel. I think there will be some really interesting things that people do when their chains are not around their heads like they are for the status quo.
Yeah, the disclosure process is eventually going to have to deal with the issue of Earth being an actual prison, not just a planet where people live. And so once people understand that the authoritarian ETs have run this place as a prison and that people can't get out, once they get into this prison, dying used to be a method of transportation. If you don't like a place, you die and you go somewhere else. But that's not anymore. They have abilities now to keep the ISBs contained within the Earth sphere. So we have like 8 billion physical human beings, and I don't know, I'm just guessing maybe 30 billion ISBs without physical bodies in the entire system. And when people realize that it's a prison, that's going to be that's part of the disclosure process. So if the ETs are trying so hard to hide themselves, the people are going to say, well, what are they hiding? What have they been doing? Well, keeping this place as a prison is what they've been doing. And the process of disclosure is going to have so much baggage that they're going to have to unravel. It's going to be a really sort of interesting process, but it'll be very tumultuous when it does happen. But that's what's actually needed, because the gradual process that was tried before simply doesn't work. So anyway, that's where we are and why it sort of has to be done fast. And that's also at Farsight why we did all of the mysteries projects, to ease that disclosure process, because once you acknowledge that the ETs are real, then you have to fill in the rest of the story. What have they been doing all these thousands of years? That's what you have to do. And that's where the Farsight projects come in. That's what they answer. What humans are going to have to realize is that they can't rely on anything that they've just been taught in school. They can't rely on anything that people tell them. They have to rely on original data collected raw and presented raw to them. And that's what the Farsight projects are. Farsight data actually make a lot more sense with respect to archaeological evidence and all types of physical stuff that you see on the ground than mainstream ideas. So even things like the construction of the pyramids, that's crazy that they are still pushing the idea that primitive people on camels built the pyramids with primitive tools. I mean, cutting those things, cutting the big 80-ton blocks and moving them from a quarry to the place, and then building a structure that has no practical purpose whatsoever. It can't house anybody. It can't do anything for shelter. So the whole mainstream idea that the pyramids are a mystery, that is what they really are. They're a mystery. They're supposed to inspire awe and mystery in order to control the population. But they were clearly built with ET tech. And so, that whole type of stuff of how much has been hidden over millennia from the human population in terms of understanding things, all that's got to come out. And then what we have to do is, once that happens and the authoritarian ETs are off, then we have to use all of the creative manpower that we have, the geniuses on the earth, to figure out how to disable the death traps so that when people die, they're not caught up. Because remember, our research is very clear on this. When somebody dies, their ISB pops out of the body and it sees the light. The light is all done by... There's so much AI. The light is part of the trap. ISBs are attracted to aesthetic things, so they're drawn to the light. And once they get close to the light, it's like sticky fly trap stuff. The more they struggle, the more they can't get out of it. And then they're zapped once they get into it with electric volts that are like 1 billion volts or more. And you can't kill an ISB, but you can rattle it. And so they lose their memory, they lose their remote viewing, perception, they lose their telepathic skills, and then AI show up and say, we have talked about your case with the elders, this kindly group of elders, and we think you should probably go back to work on a few more personality quirks, some things you have to work on, and they convince you to go back in. and you get recycled back into the system. So, that all that's going to have to come out. How do you disable those death traps? And we have a huge number of extremely creative people on the planet, a huge population of creatives, scientists, engineers, and once they know what the problem is, they can address it. Those death traps are apparently extremely difficult to find and to disable. So they're not working as efficiently as they used to be, but they're still there. And that is going to be part of the disclosure process. So disclosure is not simply you wake up, there's ETs, you acknowledge them, and then you join the galactic community. There's nothing like that. As above, so below. There's been a lot of control and manipulation, and all that stuff has to come out, and that's what we're heading towards. But that's why the delay has been there. But it looks like it's gaining steam, especially now that people can make their own video recordings of these ETs so easily.
Yeah, it's definitely a big thing about the prison planet, and well, it's not like we're the only ones talking. Sorry?
I want to also mention that if people want to see examples of our stuff, we're putting up examples on my Instagram page, Courtney Brown Farsight. You can look at them on your phone, show your friends, things like that. And on our website, farsight.org, we're having printed instructions for how to actually make the photographs, make the videos yourself. And on farsightprime.com, that's where we have the full streaming service where we show you all the results of what we do, including instructional videos on how to take these videos. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, that's a good thing to mention. Going back to the prison planet, though, it is really, we are not the first people to talk about that by a long shot. I mean, if you just look at, there's evidence for communication about the idea of reincarnation sort of being spun in a different flavor of what it entails. But that's really all we're talking about. We're basically just talking about reincarnation being a machine. It's a mechanistic process. And it's not for our benefit. That's all we've really pointed out here, that reincarnation exists, something that is many of the conventional religions around the world believe that reincarnation exists. And we're just saying, like, yeah, you're right, that exists. And I mean, it's in Hinduism, it's in Buddhism. Even the foundation aspect of Buddhism is to liberate yourself from samsara, to liberate yourself from the wheel of reincarnation. They have an entire religion about trying to get out of that wheel. I mean, literally, when you look at the reincarnation thing, it's not like everything's, any religion's completely perfect, but when you look at the reincarnation concept, we're really just taking modern concepts like artificial intelligence and the advanced aspects of how we can perceive matter. And speaking of which, the matter thing, we've talked about this before, how a lot of people would say these advanced technologies are doing XYZ, moving XYZ with sound, and how that's not really the case. Really, it's just the vibration of energy, and we don't have a name for it. So, I mean, saying they're doing it with sound is probably appropriate, just because we don't have a name in our illusion state of our civilization to where we don't conventionally believe in these things in the mainstream. But there should be a name for something else. And just for ease of conversation, as we've said before, let's just call it the Force, because honestly, just the Force from Star Wars is probably the most accurate thing to describe it. But just the vibration of energy. And when energy vibrates at a certain frequency, it shows itself to us as sound. And if it vibrates at a different frequency, it shows itself to us as physicality, the matter, the table, the chair, all that type of stuff. And if it vibrates at a different frequency, it's all of our telecommunications. It's the way that we have this technology working where we can be a video on somebody's screen. It's the way of all of these types of things. And we're adding something else to it, having matter that's out of phase of physicality, yet still capable of affecting the ISB upon death. That is the machinery of this reincarnation death trap matrix grid that is surrounding the planet. And it's not just on this planet. We've already seen that it's not just an Earth thing. And it's a big deal when people start realizing about that, when people start figuring out about that, and a big thing about when our technology of the status quo gets to be a little bit higher, and we're sort of seeing that people are sort of wrapping their heads around more sci-fi concepts just with the modern state of artificial intelligence. Then all of these things that are considered just mysteries of religion, they're just going to start seeming a little more plausible, like, oh, was that they were telling the truth about something? That wasn't just a mystical fairy tale that somebody was spinning. And one other thing that I know we talked about soft disclosure, and I've been trying not to mention this game this podcast, but I'll just say one thing about it. I've mentioned it a couple times in previous podcasts we've done. Cyberpunk 2077, there is this one little side quest that I really enjoyed, and I just had this sort of experience. I took a screenshot of it, and I went back to it earlier this morning. But you're doing a little quest, and there's an artificial intelligence that's embedded in a taxi, and you liberate him and something like that. But he gives you a text message later, and he says, "Hey, I found out the meaning of life." And then you say, "Well, what is it?" And then he says, "Hexagram 51, line 5." And I didn't know what that was, so I took a screenshot of it, and I said I'll come back to it. And so when I came back to it was months later. This morning I came back to it, and I started Googling hexagram 51, line 5, and I ended up finding myself to Gnosticism, which is just like a flavor of old school Christianity. So it's basically a type of Christianity. And basically when I found that section in this Gnostic Book of Change thing I found on the internet, it was basically describing the death traps. It was describing the ego being eliminated through high voltage electricity, and it was not saying it in sort of the exact way I just said it. It sort of had its own, old timey words and stuff like that sort of make it seem a little more metaphorical. But that's plain as day what they were describing. And then if you go back to the quest, the main character doesn't understand what he's talking about with hexagram 51, so he just asks the question again, what is the meaning of life? And then the AI responds, the world is an iron prison. And so this is being seeded in soft disclosure. It's all throughout many of the old school religions, whether they're Eastern religions, whether they're Western religions. It is a concept that has been around for thousands of years. There are death traps, and they are around us constantly. And I would admit, the word death traps sounds a little scarier than reincarnation, but they're the same thing. It's the exact same thing. It's a mechanistic process in our world that is designed to confine the soul to a set railed path, and just seems like a jerk move. It just...
No, in fact, it seems two things about it. It does seem that the free will ETs have been seeding a lot of information about the death traps into various venues. So for games, computer games, as well as some things in the media, and we of course ran into that as well. But the other thing about it is that the death traps and so much ET stuff seems to be controlled by AI. For example, the ET ships that we're video recording, there is no possible way that a biological being can fly those ships with the maneuvers that they're doing. Those ships have to be flown by AI. Now, the biological beings may say, we want to go generally in that direction, but the AI is the one that has to do the actual piloting, because they see so many radical turns and that rapid movement, change in direction and everything. That's got to be for defensive purposes, because it's very hard to shoot and hit a moving target that's radically moving so much. And that has to be controlled by AI. The death traps, you can't convince me that physical ET beings are hanging around the planet and capturing every ISB that comes out. That's got to be all automated, because you're dealing with so many huge numbers of people. It's got to be all automated. So the AI component of the whole disclosure process is a big thing. I see some articles in the news almost every day about people being afraid of AI, thinking that AI may end civilization. What they don't realize is that the oppressive extraterrestrials are the ones that are a real threat to the human civilization, and they use AI all the time, and their AI is way more powerful than our AI. So the disclosure process has to fundamentally deal with the AI issue, because humans need free will ETs to defend them while they're developing their own AI so that they can compete with everybody else in the galaxy. It's not a matter of keeping the AI dumbed down so they don't take over humanity. We've already been taken over. Humanity's already been taken over. What they need the AI for is to develop a defense, a long-term permanent defense. And so AI is in our future because we're already being controlled by oppressive extraterrestrials that use AI. So AI is already controlling us. So we need our own version of that. I'm thinking now of The Person of Interest, the television show that was so great, the J.J. Abrams television show, where they basically had two AIs. They had the machine and they had Samaritan. And the two AIs were warring against each other. But any part of society that didn't have an AI fighting for it was doomed. So you had to have an AI fighting for you because your opponent had an AI. So that's part of the whole disclosure process. I think what we're showing here is how complicated the full disclosure process really is.
Yeah, it's I think along the lines of whatever this shakes out to be, there will be a lot of revelations between individuals and between massive populations about what am I, that sort of question, the esoteric question like that, and where do I start, where do I begin, and the more people sort of integrate with the technology around them, and I don't mean sticking it under your skin, I mean sort of just interfacing with it the way that we do with our phones, but not so much in a mindless consumerist concept, but a bit more of just self-discovery, self-mastery sort of energy, sort of flavor to how we approach the gizmos and gadgets in our world. I think then a lot of revelations about who and what we are is going to sort of appear in front of us. And, maybe that's going to be relating to the world of VR as well. I mean, I'm always pretty amazed whenever I put on a VR headset and I take it off and I think to myself, well, even though the graphics aren't so good in the VR place compared to life, there is this sort of feeling that even when I'm walking around without the headset on, that this is just a world projected in front of my awareness. So, continue.
That reminds me, the disclosure process is also going to have to deal with the fact of remote viewing being real, because that's how the ETs communicate among themselves, through remote viewing and telepathy. So that's gonna be a big thing. So we're in a situation of having to demonstrate that remote viewing is real. Actually, that reminds me. Why don't we go over some of the major changes that have happened and update people on what we do? In terms of the disclosure process, people have to know what we're doing. So we just finished a SB 500 forecast. Why don't you tell people what happened with that? We do it every 2 months.
Definitely. So to summarize what happened with our last 2-month forecast for the S&P 500, this covered from the 21st of March 2023 through the 15th of May 2023. This is something that we published on FarsightPrime.com as well. Basically, we said that our results suggested modest upward movement across the 8-week period, and that's exactly what happened with the S&P 500. The S&P 500 started off on the 21st of March 2023 at 4,002, and it ended on the 15th of May at 4,136. So overall, the S&P 500 rose exactly as we said it would. And in total, the S&P 500 rose 134 points across that 8-week period. So you can clearly see there's that is an example of remote viewing just doing a good job. So we hope that people tune in to not just the S&P 500, but all sorts of projects. And honestly, the best icing on any cake like that would be for you to take remote viewing into your own hands and just try it out. Just give it a shot, and I'm sure you'll have a fun time with it.
Yeah, the economic forecasts that we do are done for educational and entertainment purposes only, but they're fun to watch, and they're only a few minutes long, like 10 minutes long, so they're easy to watch on FarsightPrime.com. We also have we also have a new mysteries project coming out. Oh, people are probably also wondering what happened to human news. So it's the summer of 2023, and we decided to change the show lineup that we have at Farsight. So we're going to put a close to the human news project. It was becoming boring in a way because we're certainly expecting major things to happen in the news, but generally speaking, the news was becoming too predictable, and remote viewing doesn't work well with things that are not changing. We have to have things that are not predictable. For example, one of the things that happened for our forecast for May was that we didn't pick up anything that suggested that there was a resurgence of the Ukraine war because of the Ukrainian offensive. And I was worried about that. I said, are we going to be wrong? Because everyone was saying that the spring offensive is going to happen in May, the Ukraine spring offensive. Lo and behold, it never happened, and what we picked up was correct. There was no major uptick in the war in Ukraine. But, that's... we have to keep things fresh all the time at Farsight. So we're just going to stop doing the human news, and the human news show is going to be replaced by the podcasts that we're talking about now. We'll have a different topic that we talk about that we're going to be able to sort of sort out, but this podcast will be more free-flowing and probably, we hope, more interesting and exciting to watch. Different topics each time, and we'll cover the things that we did. The other thing that we're going to do is this month we have our next major mysteries project coming out. And that's going to be a video that we recorded with our own cameras. And the name of it is the two-part flipping UFO. We have a UFO that we caught on our own cameras. And it has two parts to it, and it's rotating and separating. You can see the division between it. And it's flipping and doing all types of crazy antics. And we shot it in 4K, so we were able to zoom in and post and look at it really closely. So it's clearly not a bug. It was shot on January 10th in the middle of winter. There were no bugs out. And also we could see that this thing had no wings. It was two discs that were rotating around each other. And so we did a whole remote viewing project on what is that thing? What's going on? And we recorded it on our own cameras. And also we've seen that same configuration, that same ship, or type of ship, over Washington, D.C. So now we have an explanation of using remote viewing of what the ship is, who's flying it, and what they are doing. And that was a big mystery thing. So that mysteries project is going to be released in June 15th. And so that's really good. Also, we have a continuation of our show, Identified Flying Objects, where Intysam and Lincoln Lounsbury discuss some of our footage from a technical point of view. Lincoln Lounsbury, of course, is a decades of experience in air traffic control in some of the busiest airports in the United States, including Washington, D.C. airport. So he's written articles in official journals. He's consulted for the FAA. I mean, he's been an air traffic control person in the towers, a really big shot in the community. And he and Intysam look at our footage of this two-part flipping UFO, and they analyze it from a technical perspective to describe the characteristics of what this ship actually is. And so that's in the new show, Identified Flying Objects, and that show is a standalone show, but it corresponds with our new mysteries project as well. So that's really great. So people want to check that out. And also I mentioned that if people want to see examples of some of the things we've been shooting with our own cameras, my Instagram page, which is Courtney Brown Farsight, all one word, no spaces. We have some examples. It's a small fraction of all the stuff. The first time we actually shot video for UFOs, we shot it for 10 minutes. We had 50 different instances of UFOs in 10 minutes. So it was, there's just so many of these things up there. Anyway, we have some more economic stuff too. What do you say about that?
We also did release the Seco Plus project for Seco 35, and that basically is an ongoing series. We've been doing it for a couple of years, and things are just continuing along with the Seco Plus series. Also, though, we do have some remote viewing teaching opportunities. Intysam, Jeaneé, and Shantae are all teaching remote viewing, so if any of this stuff that we've been talking about sounds cool and you want to give it a shot, definitely reaching out to one of them would be a great place to start. I'm sure they would love to take you on as a student. And yeah, that's basically it for the SECOs and the remote viewing educationals.
Okay, so why don't I just go over the new lineup for our shows at farsightprime.com. So the podcast is going to show up on YouTube as well as Farsight Prime. So that's us talking about things. We also have ET News. Now ET News is going to change. It's the same this month, but starting in July, it's going to be different. ET News is going to be connected directly with our video recordings of UFOs. So there's going to be verifiable components that we caught on video right there. And those ET News sessions are going to be more in-depth, multiple sessions for the same thing. So it'll be like our mysteries projects, but just with regard to the footage that we have. So the ET News and the identified flying objects over the summer, they're going to be merged into a remote viewing analysis of the video footage and a technical analysis of the video footage. So that's how the ET News show is going to evolve, and there'll be much more remote viewing work for the ET News at the same time. The Human News show we're simply going to end. We did it since 2016. It's been great, but everything needs to come to a close as we move on and do new things. There'll be no changes to our mysteries project. Middle of every month, we're going to be coming out with mysteries projects of some type. And we have our Identified Flying Objects show with Intysam and Lincoln Lounsbury. And we have the Intelligence Briefing, which is not going to change. That happens every month. And intermittently, we have the Motorcycle Diaries, which is my sort of rant, that's free-form rant, which is useful in its own way. And we have the Farsight podcast, which people are watching right now. And occasionally the Farsight podcast will deal with dreams. So the Dreams podcast and the Farsight podcast are being merged together. And then, of course, we have the Seco Plus stuff that you do, Aziz. And we also have the S&P 500 that Aziz does. Yeah, so people need to know that the economic forecasts are... Aziz is the planetary expert on how to use Farsight's methods for economic forecasts. Again, we do it for entertainment and educational purposes only. No one at Farsight is a licensed financial advisor, and everyone doing investments has to do it at their own risk. But these are fun to do for entertainment and educational purposes, and we hope everybody follows them.
Sounds great. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for watching our latest June podcast. This has been great. Thanks for coming on and talking with me here, our director, Courtney Brown. So this has been great. Any last words?
This is great. Well, see everybody next month.
All right. See you next month. Bye-bye.
Yeah, and be sure everybody to, in the meantime, we have, all this new stuff coming out every month. So when we say see everybody next month, it's just for the podcast. All the other stuff is in the middle of the month, so keep coming back all the time.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds good. See you guys. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care.